Hello and welcome to Political Geekery, a podcast about science, politics and the intersection of the two. I'm Sean.
And I'm Mark. Today I want to look at UKIP and the things that they have said in the past, which I think are pretty shocking and people seem to have forgotten about. So I've written out 6 things that they've said which I think are pretty horrible, and I'll start off with the first one. One of the things they have said, and pretty much repeated recently, is that people with HIV should not be allowed into the country because they are some sort of threat. Again, this was repeated in the debates recently, and it's obviously something that's in the back of their minds.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's an interesting one in a way. I mean, because besides the fact that it's just fucking horrifying thing to sort of say, is basically sort of saying, you know, that very ill people should be just allowed to die if they're not from this country, you know. I mean, this sort of stat which Farage quoted about, you know, the X percentage of new HIV infections.
It was 60% of HIV sufferers who are diagnosed each year in Britain. 60% of them are foreign.
Yeah, well, new diagnoses, wasn't it? I mean,
which is trying to suggest that foreigners are somehow diseased, and they're somehow a threat to our NHS and our way of life, and it's just horrible.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is that it's kind of... I was reading like a blog about this, which made the interesting sort of point that this is something that the BNP used to harp on about basically how many black migrants to the UK were HIV positive, and that this was basically, I mean, this was just out-and-out racism with the BNP. It was, they're coming over here with their diseases. And, I mean, there's an argument there that what Farage is doing there is, without directly saying it, he's appealing to that audience. Yeah. It's that dog whistle thing. It's like signalling to those kind of psychopaths that that's what he's about, without out-and-out saying that on the TV and sort of outing himself in an explicit way as that kind of just really hideous cunt.
Yeah, he's trying to come off as the sort of the reasonable racist without actually being named that. He's trying to have his cake and eat it, which is non.
Yeah, well, it's difficult, these foreigners, they come over here and they steal the cake, and then you can't eat it.
Yeah, of course, yeah. There's clearly no NHS, but anymore because of it. Another thing that UKIP came out with maybe a few years ago. One member in Oxfordshire said that floods were caused by gay marriage being legalised. Do you remember?
I remember this.
Yeah. I can't even begin to grasp how they think. It seems like their thoughts are from last century, maybe much further back.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you kind of have that thing in popular culture, I think, from the 90s onwards. Saw it with the 90s X-Men cartoon, and more recently with Frozen, where people with amazing weather powers is used as sort of a metaphor for LGBTQ people. I mean, I think maybe he's just very badly confused. Maybe he just, he's seen that and thought, Jesus Christ, they can make it rain. I
think that you are trying to appeal to not just like the homophobic, but the religious and perhaps more elderly who are, Christians and follow that sort of religious dogma that there's something horribly wrong with homosexuality when there obviously isn't. I mean, what difference does a piece of paper make to a gay marriage anyway? A gay relationship, rather. I just don't understand. I simply don't get the line of thought. Another horrible thing that Nigel Farage said was breastfeeding women should sit in the corner. Yeah. As though there's something wrong with publicly doing it.
It's sort of, I mean, it was a very strange sort of thing, but I wasn't totally clear what on earth Farage was actually trying to say there, because it was like, Yeah, I think it was maybe that sort of, trying to have your cake and eat it too thing again. He was sort of like, he was saying, oh, well, they shouldn't be kicked out, and they shouldn't have to go in the toilet, but I'll just go and sit in a corner somewhere. Like it was kind of like he was, it is that kind of thing.
There's almost a reasonable edge to him, perhaps. I don't know. This sort of sexist views that he has keep coming up, which is why I brought that one up.
Absolutely.
Sexist, homophobic, and clearly racist. This one wasn't actually by Nigel Farage, but one of his donors said that women in trousers are hostile, and unmarried women, or unmarried mothers rather, need to have a smack.
Yeah, he was the one who took out like a full page advert, didn't he? It was at the Telegraph, espousing these views of his. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure if that's a view that the party has, but it does say a lot when donors are coming out with this sort of thing. I'm sure they must agree somewhere along the lines behind closed doors, perhaps. Perhaps they're not willing to say it themselves.
I think it's that, with UKIP you are talking about the fringes of the right. And I mean, it's like you said with the gay marriage thing before, that this seems to become a really important issue to UKIP around the time that a bunch of the sort of right of the Conservative Party were leaving or threatening to leave over Cameron supporting gay marriage.
Yeah.
And it seems like they just they mop up these sort of fringe elements.
Yeah. I mean, it helps their cause to go down an avenue. There's another UKIP donor that said gay people are incapable of love. As though I want to know how this person knows that. It baffles me.
Was this the donkey guy?
I'm not sure, to tell the truth.
There was one of them. He was a UKIP candidate, I believe. He was one of the ones who got suspended for just saying something completely outrageously bizarre.
No, I think this is one of the lovely donors. I don't think he's actually a part of the party, but again, there's a lot of bigotry from their donors.
Yeah, there was one of them. What was it? He claimed that I think it was it that a gay horse sexually assaulted his donkey, or a gay donkey sexually assaulted his horse. I can't remember which way round this sort of bizarre bestiality fantasy that he decided to express in public. Yeah, but yeah, it was something along those lines. It was pretty fucked up.
Yeah. As I say, I'm only guessing he's got some sort of experience with it in order to make that claim. Either that or he's just a horrible fucking bigot.
The latter, most definitely.
Teenagers are brainwashed by EU colouring books at school, and so therefore shouldn't be allowed to vote at 16 and 17 years of age.
What?
Yeah, I don't remember this at all. I started being pro-Europe the more I kind of looked into European issues and why they were coming up with the certain laws. And
was this in a colouring book?
No, no, I don't remember anything even being said about Europe at school. In fact, certainly not at primary school. Maybe touched on it in secondary school, but yeah, there's very little. I don't know about your experiences. How much were you taught? Because I wasn't taught in a mainstream school.
Honestly, I cannot remember
Did
anything.
Bring it up? No,
you could sort of stretch to some stuff in history, but I think even at A level, our history lessons sort of finished around the Second World War for some reason. We did at A level, so yeah. I mean, I don't remember anything about the EU. Maybe one of the general studies lessons that I avoided like the plague, but
I think this is a way of UKIP saying we're scared of the youth because they don't agree with anything we say. Let's try and make them not vote. Let's try and get them out because they're brainwashed. There isn't even much on TV and media that's very pro-Europe anyway. One of the things I like pointing out to people is how many you get those little placards which are on places which are sponsored by the EU, and I like pointing them out to people and saying, look, these are some of the good things that Europe does, which tend to get overlooked, because it is easy to miss or ignore a banner with just an EU flag on it and saying there's some money, which I think is a bit sad, because they obviously do quite a bit. And you get a lot of people criticising the laws. One of the ones that's always thrown up at me is the bent banana one, which I think was first started by The Onion, which is a hoax newspaper joke.
Such bullshit.
But people keep quoting this at me. It's just like, oh, Europe is stupid because of bananas laws. I'm just like, no, you're foolish for believing it. So, last but not least was Nigel Farage's quote on the political debate that happened not so long ago. Actually, we should say that this was being recorded on the 8th, and it was about... When was the political broadcasting? Was it...
it was
about a week ago.
About a week ago now,
yeah. And again, he came out with the same 60% of HIV sufferers are diagnosed in Britain each year are foreign, which I can't believe. I don't believe there's anywhere near that amount. That just straight off the bat, that sounds wrong.
See,
I admit I should have looked into that a bit more, but it's only now that I'm reading it out that it occurs to me that's way too high.
See, I'm not totally 100% on what Farage's wording was, but the statistic that I think he was using was the number of new diagnoses. So it's it's not like sort of the proportion of the sufferers, like the number of people living with HIV. It's like the number of new diagnoses that you're getting each year. Yeah. And I'm not sure whether it's 60%. I did look this up, but it was like a little while ago. It is like disproportionately high, and I mean this is probably partly to do with people coming from countries where HIV is very common. But despite that high statistic, it is a fact that the majority of new HIV infections happening, the number of new diagnoses happening, they try and track like the likely country of origin. The majority of HIV positive people, from what they know, were infected in the UK, and that's including foreign nationals. It was just because you come from another country and you are HIV positive doesn't mean that you contracted it before you came to this country.
Yeah. It wouldn't be the first time he's used a statistic that's just utterly wrong, though. He does have a history of spouting out nonsense just so it gets in the public mind.
It's almost as if he's completely unable to support his views using actual facts or something.
Very true. Yeah.
Alright, so this bit I'm going to be discussing some fairly heavy-duty subjects. I feel it's only fair to warn anybody listening that I'm going to be talking about children's exposure to pornography and sexually explicit imagery. I'm going to be talking about children reporting abuse. I mean, obviously this is a sensitive subject, and I feel that, people might like kind of a bit of forewarning on that. So this is something I became aware of via Ben Goldacre on Twitter. He linked to an article on onlinejournalismblog.org. It's about the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, the NSPCC. So, charity, for anybody who doesn't know, working to protect vulnerable children and to prevent abuse. They do a lot of pretty good work. They run Childline, just phone line. Children suffering abuse or neglect can report what's happening to them, or just discuss things and get some advice from sort of an outside party. Can be used by members of the public to report concerns about the welfare of a child, and the NSPCC will act on any such reports. I'm by no means knocking the NSPCC for any of that, but the NSPCC did recently put out a press release on their website, which was titled "Online Porn: Evidence of Its Impact on Young People." This is about exposure of children and young people to sexual imagery, the impact that this might have on their lives, and children recording or sending videos and images of themselves in sexual situations. I'm not qualified by any means to talk about any legitimate research that's going on in this area. And the NSPCC do fund some proper research. In fact, in that press release they mentioned 3 different UK universities, Bristol, Central Lancashire and Middlesex, where they are funding quality research, and they should be congratulated for that. What concerns me is that the centrepiece of this press release was actually some somewhat more dubious research. The NSPCC commissioned a survey through an online polling company, One Poll. According to the NSPCC article, this was a survey of 2,000 young people, 12 to 17, 700 of those were between 12 and 13. So it asked questions about how often they watch porn, how it made them feel. This was sent to parents who were signed up to One Poll, and those who said that they had children were then given a link which their children could use to fill out the survey. And the survey produced some fairly shocking statistics. So it said that 12%, so about 1 in 10 children aged 12 to 13, have made or been part of a sexually explicit video. It claimed that 9% are worried that they are addicted to pornography. Whatever that means, I'm not entirely sure.
I've heard, sorry to interrupt, I've heard that before, I don't know where exactly from, but I've heard that young people's expectations of sex are a great deal higher because they've watched so much porn, and
Absolutely, yeah.
the fact that a lot of pornography that is produced, obviously they're forcing the models like not to use condoms, so I wonder how much of an impact that kind of has, The promotion of condoms is obviously a good thing, and if I think the porn industry could probably do with promoting that more. So
yeah, well, the porn industry is incredibly fucked in a lot of ways in terms of how it portrays sex in general, how it portrays consent, how it portrays safe sex. I mean, a lot of these things are real problems, and just like sort of the level of exposure of very sort of young teenagers to that kind of material anyway. I mean, I think it's reasonable to sort of ask questions and do some research about these things, but it needs to be quality research, I think is my sort of concern. And I mean, because I've got looking at sort of the methodology and the nature of this survey, and I've got some major concerns about sort of the quality of the data being produced and about the ethics of their methods. I mean, the quality of the data, I think, is very important because when we're talking about data and when we're talking about research, we're talking about things that are supposed to be used to inform policy and to inform public opinion. And if you've got bad data, you're going to end up with with public opinion and policy that's not supported by the evidence, and that can be very dangerous. That can do more harm than good.
Yeah.
So on the quality of the data, I mean, to be perfectly honest, it comes down largely to the involvement of One Poll in the first place. As I said, they're a market research group. They're a PR company. They produce online surveys which are tailor-made to produce sort of shocking statistics that their clients can use for press releases.
Do you know if they've done any other work before, and if so, has it been askew as much?
Yeah,
you're getting onto something.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's sort of this has been talked about quite a lot on a few sort of blogs and podcasts.
Because if they've done anything as serious, then it raises an eyebrow across it all, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, this is the thing, that what you tend to see with One Poll is you'll see like a holiday company surveyed 1,000 British adults and found when the best time of year to go on holiday is, or when the saddest day of the year is, and things like that sort of shite. I mean, that's their deal. So I mean, what the fuck they're doing, carrying out research on child welfare, I have no fucking idea.
Who hired them?
Well, the NSPCC, whiwhich is they really should know better.
As an individual, who the hell hired them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a question worth asking.
Yeah. Because it's obviously somebody that has no clue on statistics or any kind of statistician. They'd probably be able to point and laugh at the prior work.
Yeah, well, I mean, the way that One Poll works, essentially, so it's an entirely online service, and when you're a member of One Poll, for each survey that you complete, 20p is placed in your account. You can't actually withdraw any of that until you've gotten up to at least £40 of credit. So that's 200 surveys before you get any actual money out of it.
Wow.
Yeah. So you can imagine it would take quite a while to actually get anything out of it. So the way it'll work is that One Poll will send out a thing to some of their members saying, do you want so in this case it will have been, do you have kids? And you answer that basically on the basis of what they're really asking is, do you want to complete this survey and get 20p? towards your £40.
Yeah.
So I mean, they've got no way of guaranteeing that the people who said that they have kids do have kids. They have no guarantee that it was actually kids filling it out, or that it was filled out correctly, because it incentivises people to fill out as many surveys as they can, as quickly as they can,
Do you think,
without necessarily having any regard for accuracy.
Do you think then that raising the pay would improve the quality, or do you think there's another more inherent problem?
Well, I mean, I think for research in general, and it is kind of a perennial problem in any kind of statistical work, is that you want good data. You want to be able, unless you're One Poll and you just want numbers that you can throw into a press release.
Or if you're Nigel Farage.
Yeah. Then so it is a difficult thing to sort of do, because where are you going to find 1,000 sort of representative adults to fill out a survey?
Yeah.
When we're talking about children, I really don't think it's an appropriate model at all. That's something I'm going to come on to. But yeah, I mean, I think maybe providing better sort of incentives, doing more work to make sure that their samples are actually valid. Maybe not just doing all their shit online. I mean, this is the thing. It's all done online. It's probably a very cheap way to do business. It's very easy to write a survey on a website.
Yeah, it's like crowdsourcing almost, I guess. But
yeah, I mean, it's a very cheap way of doing it, but I'd say it's pretty inadequately controlled.
Lacks reliability.
Yeah, absolutely. So One Poll as a company sort of incentivizes people to just fill out a shitload of surveys. Probably just sort of going yep. So I mean, the data. I mean, it's difficult to know the extent to which this goes on. I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of people who do these surveys and are scrupulously honest and kind of really think about it and only do things that really apply to them. But
then you'll get the troll that messes things up deliberately just for kicks.
Yeah, so I mean, it's really hard to sort of know the scale of this, but it renders sort of any data coming out of One Poll seriously suspect. And as I say, One Poll are not like an academic sort of research outfit. They're a marketing company. They're not necessarily interested in getting accurate data. They're interested in getting data that you can build a press release out of.
Yeah.
The Bad PR blog has quite a lot of material about One Poll. It's worth checking out. If you go to badpr.co.uk/tag/One Poll, you can see a load of stories there about One Poll getting up to this sort of nonsense. But it usually is. It's holidays and it's hotels and it's what's the formula for the ideal Twix bar or whatever bullshit.
The best way to make toast.
Yeah, that kind of bollocks.
Yeah.
Where it's kind of like, okay, it's nonsense, but I can't get too upset about it.
Yeah.
This is serious shit, and One Poll shouldn't be anywhere near it.
No.
And there's ethical concerns, I think, in their methods. When you're doing research into something this sensitive, working with children and possibly very vulnerable children, safeguarding is extremely important. I mean, legitimate researchers in this field they'll make sure that children taking part are adequately monitored, that they're safe, that they feel safe, that their parents aren't looking over their shoulder and monitoring what they're answering in questions, which is a real issue when you're talking about abuse and child safety. Is making sure that the kids sort of feel safe and free to answer truthfully without any sort of outside pressure. So it's really difficult to do that with an online poll. And I've not been able to find any information about One Poll doing any of those kind of checks. They're not the kind of outfit that should be running research into something this sensitive, and it doesn't look like they've done things properly. And I mean, I've said this I think a couple of times now, but the NSPCC really should know better than to employ something like One Poll to do this kind of research.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, obviously they need to do a lot more sort of due diligence and right across the board. In fact, it shouldn't have, as you say, it shouldn't have been One Poll doing it really at all.
I mean, it's so unnecessary because, as I say, they're already funding legitimate research, and they've already got sort of like testimonials and information coming in via Childline that they can sort of anonymise and use that to inform sort of stuff that they're putting out. So it's not like they lack for good sources of useful data. So it strikes me that it can only be, sort of like intellectual laziness and just sort of deciding that it's more important to get a shocking press release out there that'll be picked up by the papers than it is to sort of get some actually accurate information. And so that like the BBC, their headline on this was "Pornography Addiction Worry for a Tenth of 12 to 13-year-olds." And all these headlines like this, 1/10 of children addicted to porn and things like that. And it's a great way to create headlines, but it's not a good way to get information that's actually reliable.
No. And I've heard of a quote, and I'm just reminded of it now. Everything you read in the newspaper is right, apart from the stuff you know about. And I can't help but think that, because of stuff like this, that's why people have come up with a saying like that.
Yeah, I actually made a complaint by email to the NSPCC about this because I read about this last night, and I was really pretty annoyed. So I wrote an email sort of basically outlining the concerns that I've made here, probably with less fucks. But yeah, I mean they've commissioned unreliable research on a serious matter, and they don't. I can't find any evidence that they put the right safeguards in place. They're the kind of organisation that needs to be doing these things. I mean, if anybody else wants to complain to the NSPCC about this, you can get them by email, comments@nspcc.org.uk, by telephone 020 7825 2775, or by post, Western House, 42 Curtain Road, London, EC2A 3NH.
Last time we did this, I was bringing up scientists that I think should be more recognised and more of a household name. And one of the other ones, one of my personal heroes, is a guy called Ignaz Semmelweis. He was an obstetrician who came up with a way to stop child death fever, which was something that was killing a lot of people back in 1847. And it was something as simple as just washing hands. Now, he worked in a clinic that helped poorer women that were probably prostitutes and couldn't go to anywhere else. But the deal is that they did have to be studied. So he was working in a student-run clinic, which were apparently very good. They didn't stigmatise anyone for it. But yeah, what he found was that a lot of women, even at the time, were wanting to sort of go to midwife-run clinics. And the reason being is the women at the time seemed to know that child death fever was lower in the midwife-run clinics.
Right, yeah. I suppose it's the kind of thing that you're going to notice if if you're looking at your friends and you're saying, like most of my friends who have gone to, a proper doctor, so-called, seem to have died. And, so, I suppose it's the kind of thing that you probably...
Yeah.
You're going to notice, aren't you?
Yeah. The trouble is that because so many women were trying to go into the midwife-run clinics, they were quite rapidly, full to the brim. And so, because women knew that, there was a high chance of dying in the student-run ones, they were opting for the street and opting for, trying to have better at home and whatever. And so, Ignaz, being the kind of man that he was trying to think, well, let's take a look at this. Let's see how many people are dying out there rather than coming in here. And he made the assumption that they'd probably be dying more out in the street, and it wasn't the case. More women were surviving, giving birth out in the street than they were in the student-run clinics, which is pretty surprising even to me. You'd think the students, would have helped it along even if they were carrying infections on their hands, but what was happening is these students were laying on dead bodies in the morgue, going straight from the morgue and then helping women give birth. Yeah, it was literally that bad. And Ignaz brilliantly noticed that it wasn't just women that was getting this. He noticed that one of the male doctors also had all the same symptoms as this child bed fever, and so it got him thinking. He thought that somehow got into a cut, maybe. And so he introduced this chlorine lime solution to wash their hands with, and almost overnight the deaths dropped from something like 18% down to 1%, which is huge. Within a few weeks, that's a really surprising result.
Oh, yeah.
Unfortunately, this guy got a lot of pressure because the idea of germ theory wasn't about around at that time. He was around at the time when people thought that it was bad smells which caused illnesses rather than any idea of germs. So he knew it worked, but couldn't adequately explain to his peers, and his peers were giving him ever more pressure in order to explain it, and he obviously couldn't. But he knew it worked. In fact, he ended up getting pushed out of one clinic into another clinic and tried to introduce the same chlorine lime solution, and the effects again dramatically dropped overnight. And he did this in 3 different clinics and couldn't get his peers to work with him on it. He couldn't convince his peers because he had no adequate explanation. And because it was the only thing that he could talk about, because no one else was paying attention to the statistics of the deaths dropping, he ended up getting put in a mental health clinic. And sadly enough, after about 14 days, he died from the guards beating him up, which I think is terrible. So yeah, and I think the saddest part about it was only a few years later when Louis Pasteur proved the idea of germ theory and, proved him right. And
Yeah.
it's such a sad story.
Yeah, I mean it is sort of fucking terrible. It strikes me as interesting. He had the data there to back up what he was saying. What was it you were saying, from like 18% to 1%? I mean,
that's only one statistic I found. I found others which were like 30 to down to 4%. But I wasn't too sure on that, which is why I didn't bring it up.
Yeah, so we're talking about something on the order of like a 95% drop. I mean that's massive.
And this was over the course of like a couple of weeks. It was rapid. It wasn't a subtle drop. It was a huge drop.
Yeah, I mean I suppose this is the thing, like, that when you think about it. I mean, what was it you said? 70 years between his death and Pasteur.
Oh no. Pasteur proved him right like only a few years later.
I'm not sure where I got 70 years from.
I don't know where you got that from either. But it was literally like, I don't know, I think it was about 6 or 7 years later he proved him right, which makes it all the sadder.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I just sort of heard 7 because I'm a fucking idiot. But I mean, even that 7 years. When you think about, I mean, basically how many people died unnecessarily. I mean, because when you're talking about that many women who are dying in childbirth, who apparently could be saved just by their doctors washing their fucking hands after messing about with cadavers over those 7 years, and it's essentially because his peers have decided that they're just going to ignore the data and just carry on with the sort of broken modality that they've always followed.
I mean, especially more these days, I suppose the science is kind of growing up a bit more, but if you just see a statistic like that, you don't dismiss it because they can't explain it. You go, great, here's something to look into further. No, or at least I think so. I don't know why they didn't do it then. It blows my mind. The fact that he was in a mental health clinic at all, is bad enough, but the fact that he didn't survive terribly long in there.
I mean, I think sort of mental health clinics of the time, were generally pretty shitty places.
They're not spectacular now, so
no.
Back then I dread to think.
So the National Union of Teachers, the NUT, have just had their 2015 conference. They passed a motion announcing their intention to ballot for strike action over school underfunding. If it does go ahead, there should be a ballot later this year after the election, and we'll be looking at strike action in the autumn, I believe. So, I mean, when they say sort of underfunding, since the coalition government took power in 2010, capital funding, the money used for new teaching buildings, refurbishment, infrastructure developments, maintenance, has seen real terms cuts of 1/3.
Wow.
Yeah, 16 to 19 education, you're looking at 14% real terms cuts. I mean, those are just sort of like the big figures, but just across the board, education has seen these cuts. And I mean, this leads to poorer education for children, it leads to poorer building quality, it leads to courses closing, whole colleges closing, as well as sort of poorer paying conditions for education workers. And I mean, when I say education workers, I think it's easy to forget we're not just talking about teachers here, we're talking about teaching assistants, about secretarial staff, cleaners, sort of just the general support staff who are important to the running of the school as well, are all facing sort of major problems as a result of these cuts and this underfunding. We're looking at job losses now. The NUT warned that we could be looking at 1 in 10 teachers currently working being made redundant over the next few years. I mean, all this is going to damage sort of retention and recruitment for teaching as well.
Yeah, I've got a friend that had to, like, one of the ways that they said to her that she can keep her job is by writing a 5,000 word essay within literally a couple of days explaining why she had to keep her job. And she did, unfortunately she did this and she still ended up losing it, and it was just like, I struggle writing essays. I tried to think what a 5,000 one would be like. It's just horrible.
Fucking outrageous.
Yeah.
So I mean, they've said that they're going to ballot for strike action over this, and as ever, workers sticking up for themselves and the people who depend on their services has attracted some criticism from certain sections. A Tory spokesperson called the NUT out of touch. Fucking amazing thing to be called out of touch by the Conservative Party.
It's appropriate.
And over this as well, which is you're worried about money and job losses and wages and the quality of education we provide to children. You weirdos. That's God, how strange. Don't you have an opinion about the new high-speed railway? The burning issue of the day.
Yeah, the irrelevant thing. Yeah.
So I mean, workers, particularly in the public sector, taking strike action. They tend to be subjected to the same old sort of cliche bullshit every time, either from people in power or just knobheads on the internet. So I just thought I'd run through a couple of the sort of the typical ones that you hear and why they're bullshit, basically.
Go for it.
Okay, so strikers are often pilloried as being selfish for taking action. Now this is particularly bizarre when it comes from the right. I mean, I thought greed was supposed to be good.
Yeah.
Doesn't greed make everything in society work, or is that not only when the rich?
That's the wrong kind of greed, John.
You're supposed to be altruistic, and we're supposed to be greedy.
Yeah.
That's how we're able to be so parasitic.
It's the trickle down system. Anything.
Yeah, something's trickling onto somebody. So when this comes from bosses, and they're basically saying that it's inherently immoral for us to take direct action to defend ourselves. I mean, we owe our bosses nothing. Ultimately, the rich never fail to screw us over to defend their interests, and be downright stupid for us to fail to do the same back when we need to.
Yeah.
You also get the argument that the service provided is so valuable that it's simply unthinkable that workers providing that service would refuse to work. And I mean, again, you get that thing of workers are there to do a job, for money. Education workers, firefighters, nurses, all the other sort of public sector workers are human beings and need things like food and a roof over their heads in order to get by. It's simply ridiculous to suggest that they should continue to put up with increasingly shitty working conditions, and furthermore, if the job's so important, then fucking pay them properly.
Well, yeah, there hasn't been a pay rise in the last 3 years, funnily enough, the same time that the Conservatives have been in, or the coalition, should I say.
Yeah, well, I mean that in real terms.
Let's not forget that that other party, Liberals, Lib Dems, that's the one.
Yeah. I won't worry about them much longer.
Yeah.
I mean, so both varieties of this sort of selfishness argument, what they really ignore as well is the fact that strikes are often as much about defending the service provided and the ability of public sector workers to do their jobs and provide the service. So, as I said earlier, funding cuts in education lead to a poorer education system. I mean, if we want an education system that actually provides something of worth of kids, then as a society, we have to provide education workers with the resources to actually do that. I mean, you see this, sort of teaching to tests and sort of just having to stick rigidly to the curriculum all the time. I mean, teachers don't have the resources to do anything else, and it leads to a shitty experience for a lot of kids.
Yeah.
I mean, some people go in completely the opposite direction by denigrating the work done by the strikers. So you'll see this thing from a lot of dickheads of various kinds about how teachers are shit at their jobs or their jobs aren't important. Often the same people who'll say that they're terribly selfish for not doing those jobs and they're doing a lot of harm.
Yeah.
But I mean, obviously education workers aren't perfect. But it's especially when it's coming from some dick who works in journalism or who spent their whole life working in politics, putting down the job of somebody who's providing kids with skills and knowledge. It's one of the fundamental functions of our society. We simply cannot do without education of some kind of like teaching function.
But it's not even just the schools. I know for a fact that there's been cuts at government-run museums and stuff like that. So it's not just schools. And
Absolutely, yeah.
I know museums have certain unions like PCS and stuff like that, but they are cutting them left, right, and centre. It's right across the board.
It's all over the public sector.
Yeah, of course, yeah. But I mean, they obviously don't care about education all too much. Is what I'm saying. You'd think that was the more important of the things. That would be the last thing you cut. In my opinion, it's what keeps a country going is having a good education system. It's what keeps everything going, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's kind of fundamental to any society, as I said. It's that you want to pass on skills and knowledge to the next generation. You want to,
Yeah.
You basically you want shit to get done once you're too old to do it. Basically.
Yeah. Also, I think if you want a great economic recovery, education is absolutely the best way to go about it. You put more into it in times of need, not less. Yeah, that's fundamental to me, I think.
Oh yeah. Another one that you tend to see quite a lot is sort of portraying the strikers as privileged. I mean, again, this is pretty easy to dismiss when it's coming from an MP or a journalist. It's people who take 67 grand a year for sitting in some meetings and occasionally pretending to listen to their constituents. But this is often done by unfavourably comparing one group of workers against another. So it's this kind of divide and rule thing. And like the classic one, I've seen it so many times online in the comments to news articles and on Facebook and things like that. Is this sort of what about the nurses thing? It's sort of this thing of the basically sort of saying teachers are less important than nurses, therefore teachers shouldn't fight against cuts to education. I mean, I'm not saying it makes any sense.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's kind of it's bullshit anyway.
I do wonder where they're going to get the next generation of doctors from, because obviously you got certain parties attacking immigrants, so
Yeah,
it doesn't make sense.
yeah. Well, I mean, the whole thing doesn't make sense. I mean, so the starting salary for a teacher is 22 grand a year. The starting salary for a nurse is 21 grand a year.
Yeah.
I mean, sort of head teachers can earn up to 114 grand, but senior nurses can earn up to about 98.5 grand. So there's a difference there, but when you're at the lower end of the scale, it's not much of a difference. So in this idea that teachers are some pampered, privileged group is complete bullshit. It's sort of playing to this imaginary teacher that people carry around in their heads.
Yeah, well, if they keep saying it often enough, it's it becomes a part of their mantra and believed by some.
Yeah, I mean, in any case, there's a fine sort of tradition of solidarity in the workers' movement. Groups of workers, like teachers and like nurses and like museum workers, who are all being attacked, will often stand together and support each other's demands for better paying conditions. So, I mean, nurses are poorly treated and underpaid. Yep, they deserve better. So do teachers. Rather than letting the rich players off against each other, we should be standing together and sticking up for each other.
Yeah, you're right.
I mean, we benefit as a class from a strong workers' movement that can defend us and advance our interests against the bosses. I mean, when you think about it, yeah, like even when you're doing something like, say, negotiating over pay, when you're negotiating against, a boss who doesn't give a shit about you, and against whom you have no leverage, you're basically just going to them and begging, without some kind of threat of direct action, without an ability to sort of threaten the bosses in some way. They can pretty much do whatever the fuck they want.
Yeah.
I mean, we should be supporting education workers if they decide to strike, not undermining them. It's fair to say it's maybe been a bit of a grim second episode.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, sort of. But I mean, I sort of wanted to finish up with something a bit lighter, something that touches on politics and very lightly on science, but it's also kind of artsy. I'm meeting you halfway, hippies. So I wanted to talk about speculative fiction. Speculative fiction, as Wikipedia will tell you, because I'm lazy, is a broad literary genre encompassing any fiction with supernatural, fantastical, or futuristic elements, and essentially a science fiction and fantasy. So when we write speculative fiction, we're generally talking about ways that we think the world could be or should be, and whether that's in the past or the present or the future or just another world altogether. So as a result, it's often used to sort of explore ideas. So the earliest mention of the term speculative fiction comes from a 1947 essay by Robert Heinlein, who was the author of Starship Troopers.
No.
The practice of speculative fiction can be said to date back much earlier. And when we're talking about sort of how speculative fiction touches on politics, a good example would be what's called utopian fiction. This dates back to the 16th century. It comes from sort of two similar sounding Greek words, one meaning good place, utopus, and another meaning no place, utopus.
I did not know that.
Yeah,
awesome.
It's sort of it's kind of like a classical Greek pun from the 16th century. Essentially we're talking about stories about idealised societies that don't really exist. Either they don't exist now, and the author might sort of hope that they'll exist in the future, or they exist in some undiscovered country, or they exist just somewhere in another world.
Or perhaps like a bit of a warning, like I feel as though 1984 was very much a dystopian future.
Yeah. Sort of coming on to that. Yeah, I mean, so like a lot of authors over the years have used utopian fiction to sort of explore political ideas. William Morris wrote News from Nowhere, sort of depicted a stateless, classless, socialist future. Our protagonist sort of spends a night drinking and arguing at a sort of incredibly middle class socialist discussion group in London. So it tells you a lot about William Morris. Goes to bed and just wakes up in the future after the revolution. And sort of the whole story is just him sort of exploring William Morris's ideal society. And as a result, it is quite a boring story. Not a lot really happens in it. But it's an interesting example of sort of an early attempt to sort of, as I say, explore ideas about other ways the world could be in fiction. We could also have dystopian fiction set in worlds that are exactly the way the author doesn't want them to be.
Yeah.
The canonical example, as you mentioned, 1984 by George Orwell. So it's set in like an oppressive future where the ruling party watches and controls every aspect of our lives and thoughts. Themes in 1984 are pretty well known and have kind of entered everyday language to a great extent.
Big Brother's watching you and the like.
Yeah, let's say Big Brother, sort of the personification of an all-powerful totalitarian state,
And Room 101, which was the torture place, basically bullied you into thinking the way they do, and then did they execute them? I forgot.
Well, I mean, that's kind of the thing, isn't it? O'Brien sort of says you'll never really leave here, and because I mean they completely break Winston Smith. Spoilers, by the way.
That was the most disturbing thing about the whole thing, is that they literally broke the way they were thinking, and then I got the impression they were breaking them and then killing them, which is just horrible.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of implied that he was essentially so thoroughly broken. You have that end scene, don't you? That really really bleak end scene where they have actually let him go, and he meets Julia, his love, who he betrayed under torture in the cafe, and he knows right away that she did the same to him, and they can't even look at each other the same way anymore, and he's completely destroyed. And in that moment, he realizes that he's come to love Big Brother. It's just the most sort of crushingly depressing end.
It is very much.
But yeah, and it's that kind of thing. It's like the sort of the horror of Room 101 just completely breaks you. It's that they know you so well that they can find the exact thing.
They know how to press the buttons.
The exact thing that's needed to just completely destroy any resistance that you have left after however long of just horrible physical and psychological torture. So yeah, a bit of a depressing book.
You're more a fan of dystopian, aren't you? Whereas I always like the utopian kind of thing. My opinion is that I like a good utopian story when it's done right. I think it's much harder to write a good utopian story. Like, one of the things, I'm a bit of a Trekkie, one of the things I liked about Picard is he's such a do-gooder, yet still interesting, and that I think is really hard to do in any kind of writing.
Yeah, well, I think that you can have a good utopian story.
I appreciate it more because I think it must be a hell of a lot harder to do than having a dystopian, if you get my meaning.
Yeah, well, I think the thing with a dystopian story is that the conflict is kind of already built into the story, because you have some oppressive government or some horrible society.
Exactly, yeah.
And like the fact that you mentioned Star Trek is interesting. I'm not a fan. But I think sort of a similar kind of thing is the Culture series of books by Ian M. Banks, and it's a similar sort of it's like utopian science fiction, the sort of high adventure space opera type thing. The sort of ultra advanced anarchist communist society known only as the Culture, and they sort of explore the universe and get into all kinds of interesting hijinks, interfering with other societies because they're so sure that they know better. Sort of like a not shit Star Trek. But probably my favourite is the second Culture novel, The Player of Games. You sort of see utopia and dystopia meet. So you have like an ambassador, sort of representative of the Culture, travels to this sort of brutally oppressive, hierarchical society, the Empire of Azad, and participates in this tournament, which is essentially like a kind of sort of fictionalized, super complicated strategy game, and the winner of this tournament will become the new emperor. And it's sort of a story about political intrigue and a lot of interesting things going on. But at the same time, it's also about this thing of you have this character Gergely who is he's essentially you get the impression, you get this with a lot of protagonists in the Culture stories. He's kind of bored of living in a perfect society where he gets everything that he wants all the time. I do kind of end up wanting to slap a lot of Ian M. Banks' characters as a result. But but then he's sort of he's coming to this world which is just the complete polar opposite of the Culture, which is just completely brutal and obsessed with power and dominance. And you see that sort of contrast, and you see those two different philosophies clashing against each other. It's a really sort of, as I say, interesting approach, sort of bringing utopia and dystopia together like that in sort of confrontation.
I haven't read much of Ian M. Banks. The only one I have read is Wasp Factory, which isn't a sci-fi.
That's one of his.
Am I right in thinking that he drops the M when he does non-sci-fi and has the M when he does?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. It's an interesting. Do you know why he does that? Any ideas?
I have no idea why he did that. I guess maybe it was just to sort of create a distinction that it could even be as simple as that you could look at an Ian M. Banks book and an Ian Banks book and immediately be able to tell just from looking at the name whether you're picking up the Player of Games or the Wasp Factory, if one
That's
mode or the
book.
other. I've not actually read I haven't read any of his non-sci-fi stuff.
It's weird. This has been episode 2 of Political Geekery, and did you think we were going to get this far? I've been Mark, and
I've been Sean,
and
thanks for listening.
And goodbye.
Recording